Honourable Tony Ryan.
Mr Speaker, I move that the State Sector Management Bill be now read a second time. And this is the second reading and report back of the State Sector Management Bill, which has come back from the Education and Science Committee, and I'd like to acknowledge the contribution of all members on the bill. Mr Speaker, this is an omnibus bill. The intention is that it be divided into three separate bills. At the Committee of the Whole House stage, firstly a Research, Science and Technology Bill, a National Library of New Zealand Te Puna Matauranga o Aotearoa Amendment Bill, and a Public Records Amendment Bill. So to recap the bill and the machinery of government objectives. The bill provides for machinery of government changes in two important sectors. Two existing agencies, that's the Ministry of Research, Science and Technology and the Foundation for Research, Science and Technology, will merge into a new Ministry of Science and Innovation. And the National Library and Archives New Zealand will be brought together into the Department of Internal Affairs. These changes are part of the government's drive to ensure that the state services are organised to deliver improved frontline services within existing baselines, to reduce costs once the transitions are embedded, and to future-proof the long-term delivery of services by government agencies. The changes, along with other well-publicised structural reforms in the state services, such as those in the New Zealand Public Health Service, add up to a commitment by the government to put in place the administrative arrangements that are best suited for each sector. Part 1 of the bill addresses the research, science and technology sector. The amalgamation of the existing department Morst and the Crown entity Forced will see the new Ministry of Science and Innovation clearly leading the sector as a single agency, combining the operational and policy skills of the two current agencies and simplifying and streamlining the accountability arrangements both for the new ministry and the recipients of research, science and technology funding. The changes will also reduce complexity and transaction costs across research, science and technology and will enable gains in efficiency. The changes will future-proof the delivery of services by combining the expertise of what are now two small agencies to put them on a more viable corporate platform with increased critical mass and capability, Mr Speaker. Part 1 of the bill does much more than repeal the Foundation's current Act and disband the Foundation and transfer its employees to the new ministry. Its main provisions are to set out the purposes for which specified research, science and technology funding may be allocated, to require the Minister to establish one or more boards to make independent decisions on the proposals for specified RS&T funding, to require the Minister to set and publish in the Gazette the criteria that the boards will use to make their allocation decisions, and fourthly, to require the Chief Executive of the new Ministry to refer the funding proposals to the boards and to supply all secretarial and administrative services to enable the boards to carry out their functions. Part 2 and 3 of the bill bring together the government departments that gather, protect and develop for current and future use some of New Zealand's main records, knowledge and information resources. The amalgamation of Archives New Zealand and the National Library with the Department of Internal Affairs will bring together knowledge leaders in fields of mutual interest. The amalgamation will build on their common capability and their overlapping strengths in information management and information technology, and that will put them on a par with a number of other agencies around the world. And by amalgamating the three departments, the bill will set up the core infrastructure that will enable better integrated decision-making in the future, be it decisions about future spending, technological systems development or other aspects of their operations. And for these amalgamations, we can expect systems improvements, lower corporate overheads, reduced costs within the public management system. And a key feature of Parts 2 and 3 of the bill is how much of the existing legislation remains intact for Archives New Zealand and the National Library. Whereas Part 1 of the bill repeals the Forced Act and Part 2 and 3 deliberately leave untouched much of the National Library of New Zealand, Te Puna Matauranga o Aotearoa Act and the Public Records Act, the objectives of the bill is to make only the necessary minor changes to the existing acts To bring about the machinery of government changes, these are largely technical matters about departmental administration. As the Minister responsible for the National Library and for Archives New Zealand, I expect that the Honourable Nathan Guy will take the opportunity to outline these provisions in more detail. Mr Speaker, the bill was introduced towards the end of August, and to have it reported back to the House before so early in December is a really significant achievement. And I thank the Education and Science Committee, and I commend it for its hard work and its valuable recommendations. 31 individuals and organisations also made submissions. The committee recommended a number of amendments which I'll go through. In relation to part of the bill, the committee recommends, and the government agrees, that RSNT should be spelled out in full to research, science or technology or related activities in the clause covering the purposes for which specified funding may be allocated. It's just great that the Labour Party opposition turned up and achieved something. It is intended that these terms have their ordinary and natural meanings, and there should be no confusion about the references to RS&T. Secondly, it's important that the boards that set up are making independent funding decisions, and we're proposing, and the Committee of Government's accepting, recommendations for the insertion of a clause to enable the board to require the Ministry to provide all the information it holds in respect of the decisions before it. The committee has also recommended that Clause 11 be deleted, and the clause provided for the boards to reconsider their decisions on referral by a Minister or Chief Executive. These clauses were not intended to fetter the independence of the boards. The clause was discretionary and merely permitted a board to reconsider a decision, and the committee made a recommendation which the government is agreeing to that will remove that clause from the bill. Clause 15 was also unnecessary, and the committee has recommended it be deleted. And this clause dealt with the transfer of functions from Morst and Force to the new ministry, and they are not usually conferred by way of statute. They're dealt with through cabinet process, and that will continue. With regard to the amalgamation of the National Library and the Department of Internal Affairs, the committee recommended one important change of the bill which the government supports, and that's the deletion of Clause 27(2, so that the legislation clearly retains reference to the collections of the Alexander Turnbull Library remaining in the custody of the National Library rather than the custody of the department. And though the National Library will be part of the department, it was never intended to cause doubt or confusion on this important point. In regard with Part 3, dealing with the amalgamation of Archives New Zealand and the DIA, the committee recommended amendments on an important point, and they commented on the importance of retaining the identity of Archives New Zealand. And while the bill continues to define Archives New Zealand as the repository referred to in Section 9 of the Public Records Act, the government agrees that references to the department should be removed where it is appropriate to maintain explicit references to Archives New Zealand. This applies to 8 clauses where the specific functions in question will continue to be the functions of the repository, for example, receiving transfers of public archives. The Honourable Nathan Guy will no doubt have the opportunity to speak more in detail about the submissions received in Parts 2 and 3 and the Crown Law advice that the Government has received confirming the ongoing independence of the statutory offices within Archives New Zealand and National Library. And despite a rather pathetic scare campaign by the parties opposite, New Zealanders aren't in the least bit worried about these changes. Mr Speaker, in summary, again I thank the Education and Science Select Committee for its judicious recommendations, the very speedy and prompt way that it reported this bill back to the House, and the Government certainly supports progress of this bill.
The question is that the motion be agreed.
Mr Speaker.